Oh, hi! I will go ahead and just get started because it's kind of a long story. I'm going to try to make it as brief as I can, but it might be pretty long because it's kind of a long story. So, but to kind of understand how our adoption story played out, I'm going to kind of go back to the beginning just a little bit. I'm not going to go into detail on everything. I'm just going to go back a little ways. So, I'm getting a cold, so sorry. And if you hear my kid upstairs screaming, I just laid him down for his nap, so he might be a little bit loud. But I'll go back and start at the beginning a little bit. So Kurt and I have been married for about 6.5 years. Before we got married, I was diagnosed with some medical issues that we knew it would make it difficult for us to ever conceive a child. So after trying on our own for about a year, we started consulting with an infertility specialist and started going through infertility treatments. And after 2 years with absolutely zero success, I mean, not even like, I mean, nothing, no results at all. My body does not function at all the way that it is supposed to. So after 2 years and losing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, we prayed about it and decided that adoption was going to be the route that we were going to be able to bring children into our family. And so after being married for about 3.5 years, we started the adoption process, getting all of our paperwork filled out, getting in with the agency, all those types of things. And our process was quite quick, actually. We were contacted the first time after only about a month and a half. That one led nowhere. We just emailed back and forth for about a month, and then all of a sudden she just dropped off the face of the planet and we never heard from her again. So that was our first kind of experience with speaking with an expectant parent. And then after that, we had one that was a potential scam that we had talked to a little while, realized that they were just trying to scam us because unfortunately there are a lot of adoption scammers out there. So we were starting to get a little bit sad, a little bit like this is never going to happen. And after about 6 months, we were contacted by Mama J, is what we call her. And yes, there are. It's very sad. We were contacted by Mama J, and she was only 4 months along at the time, so we had 5 months until the end of her pregnancy. We went the full 5 months, went to all of her doctor's appointments, all of her scans, got to hear the baby's heartbeat, feel the baby. We went out to lunch a whole bunch of times. Anyways, we built this bond and this friendship over this last 4.5 months of her pregnancy. She was due to have a scheduled C-section on July 31st, which is actually Kurt's birthday, so we thought, oh my gosh, that's so cool, so special. They'll share a birthday. Went to the hospital. Kurt and I were both able to be in the room with her during her C-section. I was the first one to hold him. That was a really sweet experience. It was something that I will never forget. And after 3 days in the hospital, she changed her mind and decided to parent Sawyer. So yeah, that's Sawyer. And so that was actually 3 years ago, like last week, or 3 years ago, yeah, the 31st of July, 3 years ago. That was, and still is, the hardest thing that I have ever been through. I can't really speak for Kurt, but I would assume it's probably his hardest thing as well. But that is by far, hands down, the hardest thing I have ever gone through in my entire life, was losing Sawyer. Because in my opinion, it was like losing a child. I mean, we went 5 months along this whole pregnancy and being with it, and it was devastating. And it was to the point to where Kurt and I, we didn't know whether we wanted to keep going or not. And we prayed about it, thought about it a lot, and decided after that time we waited, I think it was almost a month, we decided to have our profile published again, go live again with our profile, see what would happen. And just 2 months later, we were chosen again by a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woman. We actually still have a relationship with her. She was kind of in an abusive type relationship. I won't go into a whole bunch, but for safety of the child, that's why she was deciding to place. And so same thing, we went like 4 months of the pregnancy, was along this whole journey with her. This time, because of what had happened previously, we didn't tell anybody about it. We kind of kept it a secret. Our immediate family knew, and that was it. So we kept this one a secret. And at 3 days old, we brought the baby home. And because of some legality issues, the official papers weren't signed. We just had guardianship over him. And so, yes, another boy. So we brought him home. 24 hours later, we got the devastating phone call that she had decided that she couldn't go through with it and that she was going to parent Carter. And so once again, we lost our baby. And I was done. I was like, nope, this is not happening. I am not doing this again. I cannot handle doing this again. I was devastated. I thought, screw this. I'll put another $20,000 in. We will do IVF. We'll go through all of that. But it is... He's in a better place. He's still with his mother, and it's hard because they're still going through custody battles with him. And so it's kind of a good thing that he wasn't placed with us, because we would still be fighting custody over him. But like I said, we still have a relationship with her, and he is the most beautiful little boy. He's just turned 2, I think, in February. Yeah, 2 in February. And he is the cutest little thing. But Kurt is my rock. He is the sounding voice in our relationship, and he was like, our child is still out there. He is still waiting for us. He is still out there. We need to move on. So not even a week later, we published our profile again. And a month later, a month later, we were contacted by Serena. So for those of you that don't know, Serena is Jax's birth mom. And it was kind of a crazy situation. She had chosen another family, and they had actually backed out. So they are the ones that changed their minds. So she was kind of stressing out, trying to find somebody at the last minute to adopt this little baby. And she is friends with my cousin. And so my cousin told her about us and that we were trying to place, but kind of explained to her our situation and our story and what we had been through, and said, please do not contact them unless you know absolutely 100% sure that this is what you're wanting and what you're going to be doing. And so she did, and she contacted us on Father's Day of Father's Day 2013. Yeah, Father's Day 2013. We got our first phone call from her. And that first phone call, let me tell you, oh yeah, do not be afraid to tell people you are trying to adopt. I mean, the more people that know, the better, because there are people out there that will look for you and that will find your child for you. It is amazing how that works. So, but that first phone call with her was quite shocking, to say the least. It was the feeling that Kurt and I got from that first conversation with her was so unbelievably different from our first 2 situations that it just, I mean, immediately we knew it was right, and we knew that this was the situation for us. In that first conversation, within 5 minutes of talking to each other, she was talking about our son and how she can't wait for us to meet our son. And she was referencing him as if he was already ours. And that was so sweet of her. So sweet of her that she was 100%. I mean, there was no doubt in her mind at all. And it was so apparent, but she was still so... A lot of times you hear that, you know, maybe an expectant parent becomes distant from the baby to try to not form that attachment. But it was so sweet. She still had that attachment. She still loves him so much. And it was just sweet to hear the way that she talked about this baby boy that was yet to be born. So in that first conversation, we just talked about him, and she, immediately talked about, okay, well, what are you going to name him? Obviously, we had no idea. We'd already had 2 boys, so we we're out of names. We didn't know what to name him. I'll tell you that story in a minute. But it was so sweet. Like, it was just the most amazing conversation. She was very outgoing, which made it so easy to talk to her. And so we set up a date to meet. So, like, it was like 2 or 3 days later. Okay, you'll have to tell me how. You'll have to call me and tell me how. But it was like 2 or 3 days later, we all went out and got ice cream together. And that was so much fun to get to know her even more. We have definitely an open adoption. But we went out to ice cream, we hung out, we met, and at this point it was like June 20th or something like that. Well, her due date was August 6th. And so we're like, okay, we've got a perfect amount of time. We had just bought a new house, just barely moved into a new house, so stuff wasn't unpacked yet. And so we're like, okay, let's start getting a nursery ready, a baby room ready. We'll start getting everything put together. Well, 2 days later, she was admitted to the hospital for bleeding. And we were like, oh crap, he's gonna come so early. And so, I don't know, Kurt, I just remember them. And so she was admitted to the hospital for bleeding, and we were scared because at that point he was still like 8.5 weeks early. So we were nervous about what was going to happen and how he would be, how sick he would be, you know, what would be wrong with him. And thank goodness they got it stopped and they released her from the hospital. And then within that next week, she went in another 1 or 2 times. And then on, let's see, June 29th, I believe, it was either the 29th or the 30th, she was sent to the hospital again for heavy bleeding. That time they admitted her and told her that she would not be leaving until she had the baby. And they put her on a bunch of medication to try to stop it. She had placenta previa. So basically her cervix was not in the spot that it should have been. So if she would have gone into labor, basically she would have bled to death and the baby probably wouldn't have made it. So they had her on bed rest and were making sure that they were watching her really, really closely. And so a few days went by. She was there for a week, and on July 6th, Kurt went fishing with his sister and brother-in-law. And I was just kind of hanging out. I was supposed to go to work that night, I believe. If I remember right, I was supposed to go to work that night. So I was just kind of hanging out. I was actually at Walmart buying, because we knew he was going to be early. And he was measuring, according to the ultrasound that they did the day before, he was only measuring at 3.5 pounds. So we knew he was going to be tiny. So I was actually at Walmart buying some preemie clothes and preemie diapers when I got a phone call in the checkout line of Walmart saying that she was going in for an emergency C-section and we needed to be in the hospital in like an hour. And we lived like 40 miles away from the hospital, and Kurt was fishing. So, needless to say, I freak out. I'm in Walmart, in the checkout line. I start sobbing hysterically. The sweet lady in front of me asks what's going on. I told her the story. Everybody moved out of the way so I could go to the front of the line, buy my stuff, and go. I get home, I get changed to get the baby pack put together, and this whole time I'm frantically calling Kurt over and over and over and just calling him, trying to get him to answer his phone, and nothing. So finally I'm like, screw it, I'm going to drive to the hospital. If he misses it, he misses it, but I am not missing this moment. So I get in the car to get ready to go, and finally I get a phone call from him, and he's like, oh, hey babe, what's going on? Obviously didn't get my messages, didn't get my missed phone calls. Hey, what's going on? We just got done, we're on our way home. And I'm like, get to the hospital right now. So we drove, I met him at his sister's house, picked him up, we went straight to the hospital, made it within 10 minutes of her going back for her C-section. She planned on having a family member with her, and they decided to not go back at the last minute. So she graciously asked me if I would go in the room with her. So I was able to be in the room with her during her C-section. And that was seriously the most amazing thing in the whole world. To be in the room when your son is brought into this world is pretty awesome. And so I was in there. I was able to hold Serena's hand the whole time. She gets anxiety really, really bad, so she was really nervous and really upset. So I got to hold her hand through it and just be there and be her support during that. And I'll never forget that. It was so special. It was very, very sweet being able to be there and hold her hand, because even though it was a joyous day in my life, it was a horrific and horrible, hard, very, very, very sad day in her life. So it was really good to be able to be there and hold her hand through it. And Kurt's sitting in the waiting room, anxious, awaiting his arrival. And I keep getting texts from him. Give me a picture, send me a picture. And little did he know I couldn't send him a picture because Jax was not doing very good. When he was born, the cord was wrapped around his neck 3 times. And it was tight. He came out bright blue. It was the scariest thing I have ever experienced. Serena was crying. She was weeping. Why isn't he crying? Why isn't he crying? She was scared. I was scared. It was hard for her because she couldn't see him and what they were doing with him. It was a little bit easier because I could see them working on him, see them trying to get him to breathe. It took him 1 minute and 57 seconds before he took his first breath. That 1 minute and 57 seconds was the hardest 1 minute and 57 seconds I think that has ever happened to me. Sitting there watching my son be bright blue and not breathing was very, very hard. But then after that, he was perfect. He was perfect. And I did not have a stopwatch. The nurses told me, you silly goose. They weighed him in. He was 4 pounds and 8 ounces, so he was a little bit bigger than they expected him to be, which was good. And they had a NICU team standing by to take him to the NICU, and he was doing so good that they didn't need to take him to the NICU. They brought him in the University of Utah hospital that we were at. They have 3 different sections. They have the NICU, they have a well baby nursery, and then they have just like your normal run-of-the-mill nursery. So he was in the well baby nursery, where some of the kids are that don't need to be in the NICU but are still a little bit underdeveloped or still need a little bit of help. So he went there. They took him away while I stayed with Serena. She wanted me to stay with her, and I was more than happy to stay with her, to hold her hand while they finished up. And then we went back to the room, and when we got to the room, we made sure she got settled in and made sure she was comfortable. She wanted to sleep for a little bit, so while she slept, Kurt and I were finally able to go back and see him, and we were finally able to hold him. They immediately wanted me to do skin to skin, which I'm going to cry again because if you have ever had a child, or not had a child, I mean, I haven't had a child, so I didn't know, it was so amazing having them place that baby on my chest, and that instant, like, bond or connection that I felt with him was unreal. Like, it was absolutely unreal. Being able to feel his heartbeat next to my heartbeat was so amazing. So amazing. Kurt snapped a picture of it, so we keep that picture in Jax's bedroom, and he loves to look at that picture. We call it kangaroo time. And then after I did kangaroo time for about 45 minutes, it was time for him to eat, so Kurt got to be the first one to feed him. So then we passed him off to Kurt, and Kurt got to feed him his first bottle, and he ate like a champ. We never had a hard time with the feeding, and he just was perfect. We spent, about 2 hours in there that first night. But we were exhausted. Serena was exhausted. The baby was on oxygen, so they put oxygen on him for a little while. So we went home that first night, and then we got back to the hospital and spent all day. Serena was incredible. I'm not going to go a ton into her story, just because that's not my story to tell, but she had placed a child for adoption before this, and so she kind of knew what to expect, kind of knew, you know, what would go on, or what, I don't know, she kind of knew what to expect. And so she incredibly let Kurt and I do all of the parenting. It was amazing. She stayed up in her room, and I spent the entire time in the nursery, and I got to do all of the changing and all of the feeding and all of the loving and cuddling, and she would come down 2 or 3 times a day and come in and just love on him and squeeze him and hug him and kiss him, and it was so, so, so sweet. So 2 days go by, and then that third day they were going to release him. Serena wanted to stay 1 more day. She wanted to stay an extra day in the hospital to get healed from her C-section. They allowed her to be in there for 4 days. And we bottle fed. I was going to do all the medication and stuff to try to get myself to be able to breastfeed, but it's way too hard what your body has to go through to try to do that. So we bottle fed. So that third day, well, I guess technically the second night, they released him from the hospital, but we just stayed the night in Serena's room. So I slept over that night in her room, and Serena stayed up literally all night long. We both stayed up and just talked for like 12 hours. Didn't sleep, nothing. We stayed up for 12 hours and just talked, and we told each other about our lives and our stories. We got to know so much about each other, and take care of Jax together and love on him together. And then that next morning, Kurt came, and we hung out in her room, and all of our family came to visit. All of her family came to visit. Jax's birth father came, and he got to hang out with us for a while, and it was just amazing. And then we parted ways for about an hour while our social workers came. Serena signed her papers, and we signed our papers. And if nobody has been through adoption or has gone through the adoption process at placement is rough. It is hard. And the paperwork that these women have to sign is brutal. It is brutal. It's hard. There's some strong language, and it is phrased very bluntly, and it is very, very hard to read. And so knowing that she had to read that and sign those papers tore our hearts out. Relinquishment papers are not nice. They're not fun to read. They're not fun to go through. And so we could not help but feel pain for her going through that. It was really difficult. So papers were signed. I think it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so at that point, we were free to leave if we wanted to leave. But Serena requested that we stay with her. And so we stayed in the hospital and just talked and chatted. And she just loved on Jax, and her kids were there, and they loved on Jax. And for hours, we finally, at about 8:30, decided that it was time for us to go. And she was okay with that. And she made the incredibly hard decision to actually walk us out. I don't recommend it. That was very difficult to walk away from her. I wish that, I don't know, it was hard. It was hard driving away with her standing there. That was really hard. Knowing that I was walking away with her baby was hard. I mean, I know that he is my baby too, but it is her baby. I mean, you can't deny that it's not her child. And that was really hard walking away from that. It was Very sad. But yeah, we both sobbed our eyes out the whole way home, which I'm sure she did too. I'm sure she went up to her room and cried, and then she just stayed that one more night, and she was released the next day, went home the next day. And then a week later, we had our first visit. We got together and hung out at a park with her kids, and we just laughed and played while they got to cuddle and love on him. And it was so sweet. I'll talk about open adoption maybe at a later time, because we have thebomb.com open adoption. People think about open adoption, and we have an open adoption. We talk and see each other all the time, which is amazing. I wouldn't have it any other way. I love it. So that's kind of in a gist his adoption story and what happened and how we got him finally. So last thing I wanted to talk about was how we went about choosing Jax's name, because it's kind of a sweet story. Because we had both of our failed adoptions were both boys, we did not have another boy name. We could not figure out what to name him. And a few days before he was born, we were finally like, all right, we have got to figure out what we are going to call him, what his name is going to be. And we kind of put together a little list, and none of them were really sticking out to us. None of them really, like, with our first two names, we were just, like, blown away. Like, this is what we were supposed to name him. And with Jax, we could not figure it out. Yeah, and like Kurt said, we also wanted to make sure that Serena was okay with the name. We are huge advocates of making sure that the expectant mom and father, if they're involved, have a say in the child's name. Oh, I think that that is huge, and I think that is very important, because it is their baby as well, and I want them to have that connection. So we asked both of them if they had something specific that they wanted to be in his name, because we would always take it into consideration. I'm not saying that we would use like as a first name, but most likely as a middle name. But we asked if they had anything that they wanted to name him, and they said no, they didn't really care. So, but we wanted to still make sure that once we came up with the name, that we ran it past them first to make sure that it was okay. And so Kurt and I were talking about, oh my goodness, what are we going to name him? What are we going to name him? And I really liked the name. Yeah, she, on his birth certificate, on his original birth certificate, she named him something else. She named him after a family member. So he does have a separate name on his original birth certificate from Serena, which is precious, and that we don't really talk about that. That's his special name from his mama Serena, and so that's very special to us. But I really loved the name Jack, J-A-C-K. I don't know why, I just thought it was a very sweet name, and I thought it was one of those names where it sounds cute when they're young, it sounds good when they're older. I was like, okay, well, Jax is a really cute name. Wait, I said that weird. Jax. Oh, I like that. Jax, that's a good name. And no, for all of you wondering, we did not name him after Sons of Anarchy, alright? I had never even heard of the show Sons of Anarchy. I had no idea who Jax was from Sons of Anarchy. That is not why we named him Jax. I really thought that I had made the name up, not gonna lie. I thought I was like unique and special and cool and thought that I had made this name up. I didn't. I didn't. So once we heard it on our tongue, Jax, and we liked that name, we wanted to know, we're big into meanings, so we wanted to know what Jax meant. So when we looked it up, Jax means God has been gracious. And as soon as we looked up the meaning, we knew that is what he was meant to be called. Is that not the most fitting name for our precious little dude? God has been gracious. Like, is that not perfect? I mean, I tear up about it every time I think about it. So cool, right? I mean, it's perfect. It fits perfect. And so we went to Serena and we told her that this is the name that we liked. And she loved it. She thought it was so sweet. And so, like 5 days before he was born, we finally named our little boy. Right? I know, I'm sorry, Nikki. But so that's how we came up with it. The sweetest little name for the sweetest little boy. So, anyways, everything worked out perfect. Everything works out wonderfully. His middle name is Reed. That's Kurt's middle name, and Kurt's dad's middle name, and Kurt's brother's middle name, and Kurt's nephew's middle name. So that's why we chose Reed for the middle name. Yeah, you'll have to replay it. I've been crying the whole time. So that's how we chose his name, is Jax Reed. And it's like it's a strong name. It's awesome. My little boy is just so precious, and he is definitely a little spitfire, but we love him. So, but that's basically our story in a gist, in like a 15-20 minutes, however long I've been talking. Who knows? Oh, a half an hour. Jeepers, guys. Sorry. That's a long Periscope. But yes, so that's just basically his little adoption story. He's definitely meant to be in our family. Nobody can deny that. Every time anybody sees him, they just tell us that all the time about how much he's meant to be with us. So, and Serena is amazing and just is so great through this whole thing. So, that's our story. Hopefully we can adopt another one soon, and we'll have a new story to tell. But for now, that's our story. If anybody wants to know anything else about Jax and his adoption or whatever, I can do that. Do you want to see, you want to see a picture of him? Okay, I've got one sitting over here. Let me show you. So that he's in bed, or I would show you actually him. Little boy. Is he not the sweetest thing you've ever seen in your entire life? And these are my two favorite pictures we have. These are our newborn pictures of Jax. So sweet, right? Ugh. Anyways, thanks for watching, you guys. I appreciate all of you that stayed and watched this with me. It's an emotional story to tell, but it's a beautiful one to talk about. So I love talking about it. But if anybody else wants to know anything else about us or our adoption, let us know. And we will see you guys next time. Love you guys. Thanks.